Hi, this is Lynn Schnebly with Educating with Wisdom, and today I'm discussing, did African American civil rights leaders help create the global war on women? Yes. Now I know that sounds like an awful thing to say, but they've done some pretty awful things concerning the women's rights movement. And so let's take a look at this so that we understand what it is I'm trying to bring forward so that it can be corrected. Because some of these things that have happened under the guise of religion. African American leaders that are baptized ministers. And this is a very dangerous area to be involved in. Pardon me. Specifically, I'm talking about the African American civil rights movement being co-opted into the pornography industry.
Oh,
Playboy.
hold on.
And the effect that that had on the women's rights movement starting in the mid-1960s. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. It's not really a frog. Right. Specifically, I'm talking about, imagine, if you will, that a woman in the mid-1960s has been leading the women's rights movements in the United States. Imagine that there is this whole magazine that is taking off, and it's owned by the Ku Klux Klan. It objectifies black people. It's not talking about killing them, but it's talking about objectifying them and keeping them in their place, and it sees them in a specific way. And on top of that, it puts intellectual conversations throughout its pages so that you can sit on the toilet and feel like you're actually doing something good after you've used it to sexually release yourself. What impact would that have if this entire women's movement had moved in to these highly controversial racist organizations? Because that's exactly what happened to the women's rights movement when African American male leaders went in and did interviews with Playboy. Martin Luther King, shortly after he did shortly after he received his Nobel Peace Prize, went in and gave his longest interview with Playboy. And it was with Alex Huxley. Well, that doesn't make me feel better. Now all of a sudden I don't respect any of them because I grew up, and you're going to hear about the impact that Playboy had on my family and the impact that false paradigm had on my family. Both my family of birth and the family that I had. The impact that these things had on women. And for some reason, African American men thought it doesn't matter because it's really about men. And that's how they thought. He's not the only one that is of substance in the United States that went. There is Reverend Jesse Jackson, Reverend Al Sharpton. Now, Bishop Curry didn't go there recently, but he didn't fix the paradigm either. So I'll leave that for a different statement, because that's somebody who thinks it's okay to be gay, which is what these other two people thought as well. So it's interesting how, and the reason why I say that is because they weren't willing to fix the paradigm, to challenge and heal the whole system, which would have looked after some of these other issues that have been so contentious in modern society. Why would African American men do this? Why? Why did these people who claim to be Christians go out and do this? Why? What's interesting is prior to Hugh Hefner, if we look at the women's rights movement, and I'm not talking from the 1700s, because at that time under the Revolutionary War, you had people like Abigail Adams saying, hey, you know what, John, we need to have the right to vote too. And John Adams would say, I can't even get rights for African American men, for our slaves. I didn't know the two were necessarily had to be connected, but they are, because African American men didn't treat women's rights in a connected fashion. And then as we go through the 1800s, I graduated from Seneca Falls. I went to Trinity Episcopal Church. I'm from downstate, and I went to women's college. Well, if I look at that whole area, it was also an abolitionist area, and the Underground Railroad. We were very active in all of these areas. And again, it was the issue of the men from Africa getting the right to vote first before women did. And they didn't, after they got the right to vote, they didn't turn around and say, excuse me, these women need to vote too. They didn't do that, right? I haven't even gotten to the problems in the Bible and the paradigm shift, the misinformation of translation, which had this come about because of an African perspective. Had that hurt them, they would have been all over that one. I'll get back to that. Then as we get in after the Civil War, the same thing happened. African men were not out marching for women. After World War I, African men were not out marching for women. And during the 1960s, when it was Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, African men were not out marching for women, but women were out marching, white women and other women were out marching for civil rights. Now, Hugh Hefner, and it isn't just Hugh Hefner, there was a group of people that were eugenics. And there were a few women that were eugenics that were women, prominent women. Some of the women who appear to have been eugenics really didn't start out that way, but they looked at poverty and what was happening, and that made a difference for them. Abandonment, poverty. But what Hugh Hefner found out, and some of those educated men who had their whole swinging Playboy thing, and women were not an intellectual piece. The little lady can have a little conversation as long as it's appealing to you, but she's got to wear those crazy outfits with things digging all into her insides, high heel shoes, and she has to be available for you. But your magazine has to be intellectual. And you have to look good from his perspective, or else he can't market it and he can't be respectable. He has and is a representation of a sexual Satan. He has this little kind of white light that looks around him, but he isn't really. Hugh Hefner and group found out that white women were having like 1 million abortions a year with coat hangers. And that wasn't good for their sexual revolution. They needed women to be available. They needed them on birth control pills. They needed women not to worry about being pregnant. It didn't go well. So they were already had friends on the Supreme Court. They were already wanting to be a major funder of Planned Parenthood. In fact, you're going to see some articles on this. So when African American...
Okay, we're going to pull that up now. And let's put this on pause for a minute. Okay, I'm not going to minimize the taping because I don't want us to stay there. This was done in 2010. If we go to page 2, here we go. Which were you more interested in at the onset, the forest or the tease? I would say the whole man is interested in both mind and body, Hugh Hefner says. I've always been a romantic and I've always been interested in beautiful women, but I've always had a social conscience and more than a little drive to try and, change the world. Hefner steadily refuses to concede the charge that his magazine objectified women and insists that he was in fact at the forefront of women's rights campaigns. Before there was a women's rights movement of any significance, imagine he said this, considering I'm from Seneca Falls. Incredible. Before there was a women's rights movement of any significance, Playboy and the Playboy Foundation were doing the good work that is now thought of as women's issues. We changed the laws in terms of birth control, and we were the friend of the court in the Supreme Court decision that gave women the right to choose in terms of abortion. But arguably, these issues that dovetailed nicely with Playboy's core mission of sexual liberalism, and thus would have also benefited the Playboy enterprise anyway. So, there we go. Let's go on to the next one. There we go. You're going to see a few things about how women were treated, and again, if African American, if these reverends had stood up and fought for women the way women had stood up and fought for African Americans. So, report how men conned feminists into abortion. And that's the name, John Amen. Whoops, sorry. Fisher uncovers inconvenient facts in his book showing that the legalization of abortion was a male-dominated enterprise into which feminists were lured. The culture thinks that women started it and pushed it, but there were men behind the scenes that were actually orchestrating the entire project. Fisher cites Bernard Nathanson, the Manhattan OBGYN who teamed up in the late 1960s with writer Lawrence Slater to dismantle the U.S. abortion laws. Nathanson founded the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Law with Slater in 1969. But Nathanson later switched sides and offered embarrassing scoops about Slater's machinations to put women front and center. Holy smokes, let's take a peek. If we're going to move abortion out of the books and into the street, we're going to have to recruit the feminists, later told Nathanson in 1967. Friedan has to put her troops into this thing, later said of Betty Friedan, then president of Now and author of The Feminine Mystique. So, the stance was a complete reversal for feminists who fought against abortion in the 19th century. Feminist Alice Paul, who wrote the original Equal Rights Amendment in 1923, called abortion the ultimate exploitation of women and killing unborn women. Well, I have to add, though, my children were abandoned, and a lot of women are abandoned. So between men calling the sexual shots and abandoning families, I don't know what to tell you folks. It's true. There we go. So, abortion is more about men and their agendas than it is about women and their agendas. And I wish feminists would look at this, because there are things we need to do to haul us in. We forget that sexual promiscuity hurts all of us. It does. And it breeds disease. Let's take a look at what went on during these swinging years. NASA sent the Apollo 12 astronauts into space with porn on their wrist from Playboy. Isn't that nice? And of course, as I said, the African American reverends are busy supporting Playboy and asking Playboy for support. Okay, we have a few things here. All right, so when African Americans and religious people say, look at what the women have done, you really need to look at what you've helped to do. I have to say this to men of faith that are African Americans. And this is also really important, because what I'm hoping is that the men themselves in Africa do not have the same way of thinking about family and pornography. They don't see sexuality in terms of this free Western issue. And I know that there are many, many, many problems in Africa. I'm not even beginning to suggest that there aren't. But, you know, we always assume that we're the strong ones and they're the weak ones. In this case, they may very well be the strong ones, and we need their prayers, and we need them to hold women up and to say, this is who you really are. And that will take the religious movements in Africa, the conservative Christians, to really be honest instead of playing the male game. That's what it's going to require, because if not, the Africans in Africa are going to lose to the Meghan Markles and all the other civil feminists that there are out there. It will have nothing to do with God. It's going to be pushing the Barack Obama, the Meghan Markle. You're going to have a homosexual agenda. The Crown has a homosexual agenda. And it's imperative that the African men and other men of faith break that and go back to the Haddam story and claim it for themselves. This is important for everyone. It's important that we claim these things. And if we don't, you're the one that's going to suffer with God. Here we go. And it's sad. I mean, I find this very sad, and of course I find it very sad when I look at him because of the assassination. And I'm sorry, I don't know how to minimize this. But it also saddens me of what he has done here. All right, and there's been a lot written on this, but what we haven't looked at is the impact. I'm sure that if he had to do it all over again, I'm sure, there's always things we do differently. Yeah. Because you know what? The African American movement lost from it. You lost. When they wonder what happened to the African American movement, how could you succeed with it? Let's see if I can get this one to close. Jesse Jackson leads tribute to Hugh Hefner. Actress led tribute to Hugh Hefner. Leads a small group. Former Playboy centerfold apparently jumps. Oh boy, that's awful. Your legacy lives on. Hugh Hefner is remembered as an innovator. Jeffrey Jackson. Oh boy. Father was a man in his mid-30s who lived next door with his wife, and places Jackson would go prospering for money was Hugh Hefner Playboy. That's PBS transcripts. Turn this off. That went off. Look at that. Oh, I opened that up, actually. We'll go and look at that in a minute. Let's see if this will open. Sometimes I have to put this on pause. Last week, sitting in his Brooklyn campaign office adorned with pictures of Adam Clayton Powell and Nelson Mandela, Mr. Sharpton stooped to take another in an endless stream of phone calls. This one was from the Wall Street Journal, asking his opinion on the possibility of a merger between Continental Airlines and the Delta Airlines. Can you believe it, he asked, smiling at an aide. He said he approved of such a conglomeration so long as service improved and no jobs were lost. Then he turned to another aide after receiving a call from Playboy magazine. They want to spend a week traveling with me, he said with obvious satisfaction. I guess it's all right, Mr. Sharpton said, just as long as they don't want me to pose naked. Oh, let's play it. That's go.
And let's not deny the overwhelming gross impact this had on women. Had they said, you know something, this is demoralizing, we need to go support the women over here, that would have been important. That would have really gotten things done, and it would have kept them on a holy religious foot. So I have a question that I'm going to pose to the Reverend Al Sharp, Jesse Jackson, and to some of these other, I don't want to say, well, I guess some of these other clergy who do these things. Don't you think it's time that you're defrocked? I'm saying this to the Christian community. It's really time they're defrocked. By saying, I've got to get back to the paradigm for a moment. It's well known that, and they didn't teach it, but they knew it even then, that Hadam was both male and female, that when she comes down, it's to bring agriculture, and it brings a whole different relationship with God. The relationship that human beings had prior to her is not the same relationship that we're going to have with God now. And they go out and they spend hundreds of years working with proto-weeds, trying to get things together for us. All these things are happening. In fact, in 2015, there was an article, and it's not just in the Guardian, but it comes from other places, that they talk about the oldest agricultural site ever found was along the banks of Galilee. And it's 11,000 years older than anything they'd ever found beforehand, which really brings us back to that Adam and Eve story. It even talks about the types of the types of stone tools for grinding. They had a kind of sickle that they had developed with stone tools. This was grueling, back-breaking work that these, we're going to call them pilgrim astronauts, came down in a human form. And then their children had to go out and breed with the animal people. I mean, this is amazing. Because these people, these human astronauts, or whatever they were, were brilliant. But it's more than that. That is when God established that in order for us to have a relationship with God and go back to God, it is a male-female relationship, one man, one woman. And Jesus Christ reestablishes that. In fact, he says that these two are put together and they're not to be separated unless for grounds of adultery. When the rabbis try to treat him and say, well, if it's for X, Y, and Z, he says, go back to the original. He said, this is what God did, and the man is to cleave to the woman, and the two are one, and it's only the two. That's it. And then the rabbis say, well then why did Moses give us the laws for divorce? And this is so important because people don't catch it. Remember, everybody, the first set of stones were destroyed. The second set were not the same as the first set. And Jesus goes on to tell them, Moses wrote that. That was not God. Moses wrote that because of the hardness of your hearts. But that is not God's law. But that is not God's law. And when you do it that way, things fall apart. The other thing that's very important is that it's not until she obviously knows that she's naked and this is wrong that they say now they have become like one of us, knowing right from wrong. Now it's important that we close this ability for them to go back up. All right? And they can't eat from that tree and live forever because they knew that this was going to be too tough of a job. This was not going to be possible. So once the soul went into that body and that brilliant mind went into it, that around it said, now they're like one of us. They know right from wrong. Now think about what was said here in terms of the nudity, because I'm going to get into what's happening to women globally. And I'm pretty sure you know where I'm going with this. That means that in order for me to have a relationship with other people, it's very important that they don't, they're not looking at all of this. And that not all of this is being exposed. Every time I lean over with kids. I nursed for years. I know what happens as soon as you lean over and you've got these things exposed. They're after you even when they're not. Women being covered allows us the dignity of being people without being sexual or nurturing objects all the time. It allows us to use our brains and to work cognitively. And it allows other people to see us that way. It allows the child to look at me and not see my breast and say, gee, I wonder if there's milk in there. It allows a man to look into my eyes and say, oh, I see your eyes. I'm not looking at all of these things. wearing clothes is crucial for women. Now, what does that have to say about Playboy and Penthouse and what we now have going all around in the internet? All right? Because all that vibrational energy comes back and hits women and girls and boys. But instead of, I'm not worried about boys anymore because it's always been about male rights. I'm only going to be concerned about women today. What happened to us? And as it undermined our relationships, as it said, this pornography, that these African American leaders and civil rights leaders went running to these people to get support and help from, validating them, giving them their good housekeeping stamp of approval because they're all Baptist ministers. Oh my goodness gracious, how is it you did not defrock these men? That in itself is wicked. So wicked. Okay? Think of the mixed messages they gave to African American women. What dignity did they give them? How did they mix that up? I have African American girls that I've taught, and they are, like all women, lost. What did that say in terms of putting the family unit together? Have you seen Al Sharpton's family unit systems? Wow. I can't believe he's still a minister. I really can't believe he's still got that title. When we look at the impact of that, the impact of them legitimizing and making it seem like the Playboy had a great social conscience. Isn't that what Satan wants? Satan wants to look like this, but really Satan is really horrible. And it's really that unit, that male-female unit, which makes us Adam, that Jesus Christ says is the only unit that matters, and everything else is a sin. Did Jesus ever tell that women should not wear clothes? Did Jesus ever speak of a fall? No. None of that ever happened. Now, African American men could have gone out, and these leaders could have gone out and could have grabbed women and said, you know something, this paradigm is really very different. You and I have a lot of work to do. Look, there's this and there's this. You're Adam too. This is when we first got wisdom. And did you know that the E-H-A-H ending at the end of those Hebrew words, Yahweh, Yillah, are all feminine nouns? Oh yes. They're all feminine nouns. Well, you want to talk about a difference in society. Now, I have a hard time saying God the Mother, but God has let me know that I have to come out and say God the Mother because it's absolutely necessary. It's necessary that women are empowered, that they take that they understand that we are supposed to know right from wrong. We're supposed to know to put our clothes on. And really just say no to men in that regard. Not say no to men, say no to that. They lied, they were scheming, they were conniving, and some of them don't want to do this because they look at the African situation or they look at the situation in South America. You look at situations such as in Egypt, and in Egypt, little girls just wore a little string around there and they had themselves exposed. They ran around nude. Little women were nude, except for a little bit covered up down here. But then again, high-ranking women could marry their grandfather. And they talk about the great God. Now, you might want to ask, why did African American men do that? Cheap publicity. It was very cheap publicity, and they fell right down the hole with it. Playboy was standard issuance for the armies, for the Navy, for the Air Force. It was standard issuance in the world, in terms of our world. And it was what they wanted to do. So we're going to take a look in a minute and see about them. Now, I hope that, and the other thing they did is that Playboy and Penthouse and all of them, well then, as well as the African Americans, they then would say, well, gay, lesbian, and transvestites and transsexual rights, they're all necessary as well. Well, if you fix the paradigm and the wording on the other side, everything would have kind of changed. Not kind of changed, definitely would have changed. The environment, the economy, if your paradigms are truer to what is real. And that paradigm, by the way, which is why I'm going out to change it, is crucial. Because that is where Yeshua and God puts their hands around everybody. Because everyone benefited from that woman making that leap into her body to come to earth to bring agriculture. And that understanding of agriculture, and not the lion man, the lion beast man, and going out and having multiple wives and doing all of these things, that's not the solution to everything. In fact, Jesus says, unless you physically can't do it, every man should have his own way. Each man should have one way. Well, the Greeks have a problem with this, and the Romans have a problem with this, because they want to be able to have affairs, and Jesus tells them they're not allowed to. In fact, Jesus contradicts earlier writings that are supposed to be from Moses, and he says, something? A man that goes out and has an affair has committed adultery. Well, that is something they never thought of before. They didn't want to put that in there. It was only women who committed adultery, and you only committed adultery if you had sex with a married woman. Married men, if they had sex with single women, that was an adultery. Oh, Jesus said it is. It's very interesting. So you can see where Jesus was really bucking heads up against men. All right? He was not playing their game. The Greeks were horrific. They had male nudes all over the place. Greek men took up with male youths. That's what they did. They married girls. They married girls and raped them when they married them, and kept them basically in bondage throughout most of their life. That was in Athens, but you think of that as being democracy. Isn't that interesting? And don't get me involved in Rome. Rome started with abandoned men, abandoned boys, and then there's the rape of the Sabine. Does it get worse? And then you have the problems that go on in Egypt. Very different to this whole thing is the institution of Judaism that Christ brings back and hammers to them. It starts with that one man, that one woman. And this is a problem in the Catholic Church and other places. They want to make it about the mother, the God the Father, and then it's not God and the God the Mother, which is what it really is. Because if those words are actually really feminine as well, then it's also God the Mother. They have God the Father, and then they have the mother-child. Well, it's really nice that we have a mother-child relationship, and we do, but it really is about my husband and myself. That's the unit. That makes everything else safe. That's what grows the society in a healthy way. So that's what we have to establish to make healthy. And these African American men have not done it. They used women, and they used African American women and white women, and then they went out and they took part in all this pornography and all this other kind of stuff. And then, it didn't matter because they were doing it to women, and it didn't matter that they did it to women. It didn't matter that they robbed women of healthy husbands and what that actually did to their sons. No, because it was just about the men and what they wanted. So we're going to go in and we're going to take a look at that. What I'm also hoping to do here is I hope that this will help to strengthen the godly positions of my fellow teachers and all mothers and families. As well, I'm looking to their assistance in not just adding to this discussion, but in demanding an equal say in what is left and what has not been destroyed in the Bible for translation. This is our God-given responsibility. We're not talking about a right here, ladies. We're talking about a God-given responsibility. And if need be, we will die fighting for it. because that paradigm under God must be changed. Everybody is trying to do it civilly, and there's a problem with civil responsibilities. Now, I know that sounds weird, because what happens is that when you do it civilly, you're not working within the framework that God wants you to do it in. And that's what the African American men did. They didn't do it under God. They did it civilly. Why didn't they do it under God?
Okay, with this, I need to end this because I need to go. And I'm just going to read something. I want to get out of this so I don't have to look at myself. And I'd like to end with this, the two creation stories, and this is taken from God as a Verb, the Kabbalah. It's from Rabbi Cooper. And he says the two creation stories. Again, God as a Verb, and it's on page 55. When we read the Adam and Eve story, literally, fundamental questions arise. Was the serpent under instruction from God to seduce Eve? If so, God's punishment would seem hypocritical, or worse, downright diabolical. If the serpent was not under God's instruction, was it simply a troublemaker? A troublemaker in the Garden of Eden? This is an oxymoron. The Garden of Eden is another name for paradise. Paradise does not have troublemakers. And so with that in mind, I'd like you all, and there needs to be a part 2 for this, I know that. Okay, God bless everyone.